Good evening, everybody. We're going to make a start. This is our first episode in this, our foreign correspondent. It's people who live in other communities and can share gems that will enrich our lives over here in London. So I'm going to introduce my dad, who will then further introduce our special guest this evening, all the way in Johannesburg. Welcome to everyone from London and beyond, Johannesburg, and wherever else you're joining us from this evening. We're delighted to see everybody. Here we go.
Okay, so very, very warm welcome to our two special correspondents from Johannesburg, South Africa, Zev Krengel, who's the Vice National President of the South African Board of Deputies, and Hinda Mendelow, who is a family law attorney and former chair of Limud in Johannesburg, and who's at the forefront of a lot of activities in Johannesburg. So let's start with Zev. Zev, just tell us what you actually do. What does your, in your real life and in your communal life?
In my real life, we have a spice business where we supply different spices to different companies, from the Nando's to the different butcheries to the different brands, and that's our day job. And then most of our day job is protecting Jewish life and Jewish way of life in South Africa, which has always been a big obsession for me as a young kid growing up in B'nai Akiva, and believing that we all have to look after all Jews. And in South Africa, we're not the biggest community, but it's a great community that's all at one. And for that, we fiercely protect it and defend it. So that's how we got so involved in this.
How much time do you spend on your communal work?
So my communal work, it depends. If there's a crisis where we fight in Judge Goldstone for the Israeli government, can take up to 70–80% of the day. If it's just looking after South African jury or defending Israel's right to exist in quite a hostile environment, it can be anything between 30–50% of a day. So it just depends what the crisis currently is.
That's real dedication. All right, we're going to come back to some of those issues, but Hinda, I know that family law is one string to your bow. There's lots of other things you do, and you're very involved with young people in South Africa, certainly with Limud. Tell us a bit about your life and what your practice involves, and some of the extended activities in which you're engaged.
Thank you. So I'm an attorney. I specialize in family law. I do a lot of pro bono work within the, during the lockdown, I've had to go to the Soweto Protea Glen Court to deal with children in need of care and protection, a lot of domestic violence work. I also do a lot of work within the wider Jewish community. I'm very involved in Limud. I chaired Limud for 2 years in Johannesburg. I attended Limud in the UK, which was a real highlight of my life. I also lived overseas for many years. I lived in America, I taught there, I specialized in early childhood education. I lived in Israel, I lived in Australia, and now I'm back in my favorite country. And I'm also involved in other Jewish organizations such as Go Getters, which helps people who are being denied gets to obtain their gets, as well as Abad and many other organizations.
Great. Okay, so we're going to come to some of these issues, but I know that some of the people who are participating don't know a huge amount about the South African Jewish community. Jewish Policy Research Unit recently produced a report, and I read the headlines of it, and I was really struck by what seemed a contradiction. So let me lay out some of the things I read and then ask you to comment on this. So total population of Jews in South Africa in 2019, only 52,300, which must be greatly diminished from what it was certainly when I was growing up in South Africa. Very close-knit community is the one sense you get from the report. And that is evidenced by the fact that 80% of the Jews in South Africa live in Johannesburg. 71% say that more than half of their friends are Jewish. 75% of school-aged children go to Jewish schools. 71% give more than half of their personal total donations to Jewish charities. And there's only 19% intermarriage, which compares, by the way, to 26% in the United Kingdom, 21% in Australia, and a staggering 58% in the United States of America. So all of that suggests a very close-knit community, living all in pretty much in the same town, very much involved with each other, children getting to know each other, etc. And on the other hand, as you read through some of these statistics, you discover that 95% of the people who interviewed of South African Jews say the government corruption is a very big problem in South Africa. 94% say that unemployment is a problem, 87% that crime is a problem, and 57% say that they actually feel anti-Israel sentiment. 15% of South African Jews said that they're likely to leave South Africa in the next 5 years, and a staggering 32% said that it is likely that they will permanently settle in Israel at some time in the future, which seems to give a very opposite impression of discontent and of unhappiness and everything which is contrary to the first part of the report. So, Zev, how do you reconcile these two very different responses to the people to whom these questions have been asked?
So, from our point of view, I mean, South African Jewries, it's always loved to complain, and it's always been unbelievably looked after in South Africa. I mean, South African Jewries mainly Lithuanian. We came from the 1800s mainly. I mean, there were Jews literally from, in the Western Cape from the late 1600s, but in reality, from 1880 when gold's found on the reef. And the majority are Lithuanian. South Africa has been unbelievable to its Jews. We've never had a pogrom on our continent. Our levels of anti-Semitism are some of the lowest in the world. I wear my kippah whether I go to a football match in Soweto or whether I go to a rugby match in Pretoria, which are the two spectrums of white Afrikaans and black South Africa. You never feel threatened as a Jew. As I said, that's my obsession. My obsession has always been that South Africa has always been good to its Jews, and we have to keep it that way. Yes, the ANC government has always had a strong alliance with the Palestinian, more the PLO, and they've always believed, they've always had strong ties, literally from the time they fought with the Russians and the Cubans during the Cold War. And that's always been a very difficult part of our job. But the obsession of trying to not make the Jews feel uncomfortable. We are part of the white majority, the minority. We are part of the white minority. We did have the privileges during the apartheid of the white minority. A lot of Jews did fight in the apartheid period. They gave up their white privileges. And I mean, that was almost 95%. One of our big fighters just passed away, Dennis Goldberg. He did unbelievable work, but a lot of them never felt the connection to Israel. And then a lot of them weren't, they weren't accepted in the local Jewish community during the apartheid era. So we're a very complicated breed, but in reality, what I've always loved about South Africa is the oneness in the Jewish community, its commitment to its own and the different. We have one Beth Din, we have one chief rabbi, Orthodox Jewry, although the majority of South African Jewry will drive to their Orthodox shul, regard themselves as Orthodox. Our brisses, our weddings, our divorces are mainly done 95% all Orthodox, and it's a community of contradictions, but it's unbelievably special, it's unbelievably hospitable. And for me, what I've always loved about South Africa, whatever you believe, whether you're secular, whether you're religious, whether you're ultra-Orthodox, whether you religious Zionists, when you're secular Zionists, we all get on and we all work with each other. And that has to fiercely be defended, especially in these difficult times where people are trying to make us, even in our own Jewry, whether we're in America, whether we're in England, whether we're in Israel, to choose political parties, to choose political ways. And yeah, we're a big contradiction. I mean, we were at a height in the 70s of about 120,000. I think those figures are slightly less than that. We are going to do our own demographics, but I don't reckon we're more than 65,000. I don't think they're very far off, 65, 70 max. It's a diminishing community, and we've had a lot of immigration in the last 5-7 years. The President Zuma years, which were full of corruption, a lot of people felt that there was in the future, and because it's a community that's very Zionistic, Israel's taken a lot of our Jews, which we're very proud of. And the the South African Jewish Board of Deputies always had a motto: stay home or go home. And we're proud of what we have given Israel. We're proud of what we've given the world. We're proud of what we've given London, America, Australian Jewry. So we're great exporters of great Jews throughout the world. So we're full of contradictions.
Hinda, do you want to add anything to that?
I think I'm a contradiction within a contradiction. No, I'm joking. But, Zev spoke about Dennis Goldberg and about how the Jews that often opposed apartheid were also, because of the ANC-Palestinian relationship, were also possibly anti-Zionist. I grew up in a home where my parents and my grandparents were huge anti-apartheid lobbyists. My father went to jail for fighting against apartheid and nearly couldn't be a lawyer because of that. And my grandfather's phones were tapped because he took the Law Society to court on unfair rulings. And so, as much as there is that connection, and as much as there's also were always the Jews who fought apartheid and who at the same time support Israel 1,000%. And just another thing to add, I think everyone likes a good Corona story, and currently South Africa politically and our numbers are very, very low compared to the rest of the world, and our government stepped in. And right now, I think South Africans are proud to be South Africans. Yes, there's fear about the economy, and I'm sure we'll discuss that. But in general, there's very low lives being lost at the moment, and people are proud to be South African. And living in lockdown, I think we have one of the most luxurious lifestyles in the world under such circumstances, which I'm sure.
Let's just talk for a moment. We'll come back to some of the issues. I know some of our participants want to ask questions about relationship with ANC, etc. We'll come back to that. But let's turn for a moment to coronavirus, because our understanding over here is that you had a very early but also very brutal lockdown. Some people want to suggest that the President Ramaphosa acted very quickly because one of his predecessors acted very slowly when it came to a matter of AIDS, and that was the shame of South Africa at that stage, and he moved very quickly so that that accusation couldn't be leveled against South Africa again. Tell us what it's been like to be in lockdown, but tell us also what it must be like, not for people who live in lovely homes with gardens and swimming pools and all the other luxuries, but what it must have been like for people living in some of the areas where Black people are living, in cheek by jowl, in homes without gardens, etc. Can you give us some insight to how the lockdown has progressed in South Africa?
So, I think that the thing that we also have to realize was in the early stages where we didn't have lockdown, the South African Jewish community had a very high rate. A lot of South African Jewry were coming overseas, coming from New York, coming from London, coming from Israel. In the Jewish community, we had Professor Barry Shub, who was the head of infectious diseases for the government for almost 40 years. He got the President Award in 2011 for it. He consulted for us. Then we've got Dr. Richard Friedland, who's the head of the biggest private hospitals called Netcare, who consulted with us, and we actually got very tough on the community very early. We closed the schools, we closed the schools, we came under a lot of flack. And that literally 10 days before government lockdown, I truly believe saved hundreds of Jewish lives. Currently, we've lost 2 Jews so far, which is a pity. One in Johannesburg, one in Cape Town. Both the Johannesburg's 80 and the one in Cape Town was also in his late 70s. But we got it quite early. We lobbied government very hard in those early days to do the travel ban. We saw what was happening. We could see what Israel was doing. And I must say, President Ramaphosa was unbelievable in closing it down early. Just South Africa's got a complicated case with COVID-19. We're going into winter. I always say there's 2 propane tanks hanging over our COVID fire. The one is the winter, and then, of course, the one is our HIV/AIDS positive population, which is very, very high. TB population, because of the HIV/AIDS, living in very close quarters. So it was very important. But the average South African black person lived through the pandemic of HIV/AIDS. They were going between the late 90s and the mid 2000s, almost to 6-7 funerals of people they knew during that HIV/AIDS pandemic before the ARV started rolling out. So they were very fearful of it. They have listened, like we have pretty much all listened. Government's been good. The last week, I think they lost a certain level of credibility. They flip-flopped over a cigarette ban. They're not allowing the alcohol being sold. The food can only be deliveries and not takeaways. I think President Ramaphosa will come back. My personal concern is the economic one, and what price are you paying to save a life today, which you might lose a life in 3 weeks to malnutrition or to children. And it's a very, very complicated case where we are very proud of our government. Is it's listened to the experts, it's talking to the professionals. We are lucky because we live not in a center of the world, New York, London, Paris, or Milan. We didn't get hit first. And I think if that was the case, we would have had many more deaths. But like many other countries, we haven't listened to what happened to other countries before. We have. So we're still in the early stages. We're far from out of the woods. We just came out of total lockdown to level 4, it's called.
But your total lockdown was not a soft lockdown, it was a hard lockdown. As I understand it, were you allowed to move out of your houses? Were you allowed to exercise once a day?
No. So also once again, what they're going to do for someone in the northern suburbs, which is, let's say, where the most Jewish community lives. You live in a beautiful home and you can run with yourself or a few people in a big road. Someone who's living in Soweto, which is the predominantly black area where during apartheid most blacks could only live, or Alexander, which is actually very close. There you've got 7-8 people in a very small shack, and if you're going to allow them to exercise, and they're all going to run. So there was, we weren't allowed to exercise. Only essential services were allowed to be, were allowed to go out. You needed permits. The police, the army came on the streets. So it was quite a brutal lockdown for, let's say, it was the first 5 weeks. And now we're coming into level 4. There's going to be over level 4 to level 1. The Cape Town is the epicenter now currently, which has got, it's really spreading heavily. Johannesburg and Pretoria is spreading less. Durban, which is the other big city, is in between. And I think they're going to start doing regional lockdowns. So they'll start lifting, let's say, your further out rural areas, which have much less cases. Cape Town will stay. Durban's really stayed on the hard lockdown. So the government's doing the correct things, but it's coming at a very, very high cost to the economy and to the vulnerable. It's become very, very difficult. And once again, the community has been unbelievable. We have joined what's called the Angel with food parcels, giving, people are donating. And we also have a big influx of Zimbabweans, Mozambiques who come here for work, and then they give a lot of their money back to their families, which isn't coming. So there's a lot at play in South Africa. We're doing really well at the moment. But it's not a mature society, and it's not a society that's got that's got means. So you have to look after the vulnerable. The government's been very good with that. I suppose the slight upside for South Africa is we've had what's called the social grants. We have lived with 28% unemployment for the last 7-8 years. And if you don't have a job in South Africa, you get 2,000 Rand. And the Rand to the pound's about 1 to 23. So you can imagine what that's in pounds. And that can literally sustain a person in the township. So they've increased those, and people that have lost their jobs, they've given them more. So it's not that expensive to keep people surviving. But it's economically, it's going to take a lot of pressure. And as I said, the propane tanks, if it does spread in the township, if it spreads in the majority black areas, which are really living on antiretrovirals, millions have AIDS, we could still see a major catastrophe in South Africa.
Hinda, as a lawyer, have you bumped up against any of the limitations people who've perhaps wanted to, African people who've living in, perhaps working as maids and therefore live-ins with their families and needed to go home for some reason or another? Have you had any experience of some of the difficulties which they have found and, you know, in being able to move around?
So yes, unfortunately, as they've said, you know, us, most of the Jewish community in the northern suburbs are blessed with our big houses, and many people have actually kept their domestic workers have chosen to stay on the property and be in lockdown with them. So which, you know, has made life a lot easier for the Jewish community and the wealthier people, but also has meant that people, once they chose to stay in lockdown, they couldn't go home because there was an absolute lockdown. There was no transport to go home. So you had about 3 days to decide if you were staying or going. And for the people who stayed, that was it. And then what's happened now is the government has basically said that everyone has one opportunity to move if they're home and they need to come back for work, or if they're, you know, in Johannesburg and need to go elsewhere to go home to their families. They are giving them one opportunity, but in order to go, you have to get permits.
And if you were bereaved, were you allowed to go back to for a funeral or?
So in terms of funerals, what happened was originally they said no. Someone brought an urgent application to the High Court as their brother had died and they wanted to go to KwaZulu-Natal from Johannesburg for the funeral, and the court ordered against it and they missed the funeral. And then after that, the government actually changed the regulations and they said that it wasn't fair for people to not be allowed to travel home, for people to not be able to travel to funerals. So therefore they changed it that just immediate family could go to funerals, and it has to be less than 50 people and no service afterwards, but very strict rules against that. And in terms of public transport, initially they only had, you know, most of our country, most of our workforce take public transport from the townships into the main areas, into the cities and back. And originally there was no, they were only allowed public transport between, I think it was 5 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock in the morning. And then again about 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock. I can't remember the exact times. And this caused a huge problem. I went to Soweto to court one day, and my client, we finished court at 10 o'clock, and he had absolutely no way to get home. I ended up driving him to his house in Soweto, which was a big risk to me because I didn't have a permit to drive in those areas, only to go to the court and back to my office, but I couldn't leave him stranded. But the point is that they then had to slowly learn, you know, as time has progressed, into what can be done and what can't be done, and there's been lift. So now there is public transport, but only a certain amount of people in a taxi at a time. It is very controversial, that, because people are saying, well, hold on, how can you have that many people in a taxi at once? And then you're saying that other things aren't allowed, which is much less people. So there's a lot of, you know, people are unhappy, people are happy. There's lots of...
It sounds like you have been experiencing the problems that we're just about to experience when we try to get people back to work with all of its contradictions. Tell me, Hinda, in terms of communities, the way in which communities have responded to the lockdown of shuls, the rabbis and the rebbitzins, what have they done, you know, to keep community together? Have they been successful? Have they been creative? Is there energy still in the Jewish community? Tell us about some of that stuff.
So as Zev said, the community actually went into shutdown about 10 days before the rest of the country. And really, it's been unbelievable what's been going on in South Africa. I've attended many courses on Zoom. There's been so many, the Jewish Report in South Africa, which is the Jewish newspaper, has been holding events nearly every day, from cooking classes to economic discussions to the amazing race, games, all different things. You know, therapists talking about lockdown, all different topics to keep everybody, you know, aware and up to date. The rabbi sent out, my rabbi sent out a letter, which I believe originally was from the chief rabbi, which I think all the rabbis sent to their community, saying that not adhering to lockdown is actually a break of halacha and you have to keep to it. So the shuls have been closed for nearly months, since Purim, basically, since just after Purim. And but everyone stayed connected, and so many people have been offering their services, giving free workshops within the community on Excel and marketing to really just help the community.
Are shuls running virtual services?
So during the day, some shuls are holding services all together in the morning. Classes have all gone online. What's the one really unbelievable thing that happened is Sandringham Gardens, which is the one old age home here. When the whole country shut down, they shut down Sandringham Gardens so that everyone in Sandringham Gardens was safe. And what actually happened was, because all of the people in Sandringham Garden are safe, they are the only minyan that is still running in South Africa is within the old age home. So when they need to name girls around the world, they're contacting Sandringham Gardens to ask them to do it at the Torah. And Kaddish, they're saying Kaddish for every single South African that needs Kaddish said, because they are the one and only running minyan, which really, really is incredible. And I think the rabbis have had a very hard time and had to make hard decisions. For example, for mikveh for ladies, the rabbis made a ruling under lockdown that you can't go to mikveh at night on the 7th night, and therefore they only opened one mikveh and you go on the 8th day by appointment only. So they've really had to make, you know, very hard decisions, and really the community stepped up and really come to the party and have been learning, engaging, teaching online and connecting online. And
right. Great. Has there been any pushback from people about mourners not being able to say Kaddish, as there has been here in the UK? Has there been any issues relating to disappointment that of rulings that you can't use Zoom for Pesach, you know, to Orthodox families? 48% of all South African Jews apparently are defined as Orthodox, and presumably the rabbis in South Africa, the chief rabbi, as here in England, probably ruled that you couldn't use Zoom for a family Seder. Has there been any pushback on that from within the community?
So, you know, it's interesting in South Africa, the majority regard themselves as Orthodox, and the majority use Zoom on Pesach. The observant part of the community that always say keeps Shabbos and keeps kosher, it was never even a thought to use a Zoom. You know, none of the, you know, the Lubavitch community or the B'nai Akiva Mizrahi or even the big shuls. If you keep Shabbos and kosher, no one even thought of using a Zoom. It was never a question. And then the people who would have driven to their Orthodox shul on first night Pesach use Zoom on the first night Pesach, and everyone did what they felt was the, you know, the right thing to do. I think what is also an amazing thing in South Africa is, in the early stage, South Africa is a very Christian country, and the Christian communities have a lot of pull in the black communities, And one of the very first meetings, the president invited the chief rabbi with all the big, all the different denominations of the Christian communities. And we got special dispensations. We worked very hard with the government, myself and the chief rabbi, where we were worried about circumcisions because it's quite a big thing in the Muslim community as well in the black community to have circumcisions. Ours needs to be in 8 days, as the others have more flexibility. And the Minister of Justice basically was very comfortable with us having them as long as they were done minimally. And then the other thing was the kosher food. So in the ultimate lockdown, you could only go to the big supermarkets and you could only buy food there. As you do have what's called the Pick and Pay, which is our big supermarket, not everything is kosher, and you have the kosher restaurants and you have the kosher delis. So we got special dispensation for that. We got a very big legal company called ENS, Professor Michael Katz, allowed one of his senior partners. We had 1 or 2 cases just before Pesach where they came into one of the kosher fish places that sell fish. And the police came and we had 1 or 2 issues, but we've had unbelievable dispensations from government to respect the way South African Jewry has lived. And look, Pesach was difficult. I mean, you were with who you were with, you know, but everyone got their matzah, everyone got whatever they needed. And then people were amazing for the old age home, for older people who were living alone or whatever. They dropped off stuff. It was just unbelievable. You know, the community came together for itself.
As you come out of lockdown, presumably there'll still be, as we're going to have over here, an emphasis on social distancing. And that will affect the numbers of people who can be together in any one place. And that will impact upon synagogues as well, no doubt. Many of your synagogues are very big, and they're not full anyway. So probably won't make any difference if everybody comes to shul. They're still socially distanced, other than on Friday nights when it's very full. But how would you see, supposing, you know, by the time we get to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you know, and we're still socially distanced, we don't have a vaccine, etc. How do you see that panning out in terms of the way in which the community will respond to not being able to all be in shul on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, which is such a big thing in South Africa as it is here?
So look, it's slightly more complicated for us because we can't go ahead of the government. And the government, because of the big church services, we have in Easter, it's called the Zionist Christian Church, which has close on 1 million people, which they call Mount Moriah, which is sitting about 300 kilometers north of Johannesburg, which they had to stop. So the bishop who's in charge of that church was very upset about it, but he did work with President Ramaphosa. So currently, we're not allowed synagogue services with, I think, till we get about level 2 or level 1, which we're told 2 or 3 away. And then even then, it's only 10. Now, I can't tell you where they got the number 10 from, but there had to be a Jew somewhere in government because it wasn't 9 and it wasn't 15. It was 10. It was an exact minion. So I can't tell you where it came from, but I'm really hoping we'll be on a level. Our scientists and our experts are believing we'll be at our peak only in September, which is going to be around the Rosh Hashanah time. So I think it's going to be very difficult over that period. If we only allow 10 people per synagogue, I'm sure what will happen in our Jewish community will have a lot of 10 people and a lot of different places. But we're going to have to navigate that. But currently we can't open our shuls at the current stage.
Right. I'd like to open this to questions. We have a number of South Africans who have joined us as well, both here in London and some South Africans in South Africa as well. So please feel free to chip in as well. But I know that Johnny Gould had a question. If you can either, you have the opportunity to unmute to ask your question, or you can put it down in the chat and then I'll ask the question for you. You just click on the chat at the bottom of your screen and type your question if you don't want to ask it yourself. But Johnny Gould wanted to ask a question about ANC. So Johnny, this is, you're a journalist, you are aficionado of Zoom. Why don't you ask your question yourself?
Thank you, Rabbi. Hello to you, sir. Thank you very much for your contribution tonight. Very, very interesting indeed, of a snapshot of South Africa. I just interviewed the chief executive and founder of NGO Monitor, Gerald Steinberg. And he talked about the Durban conference in 2001 which happened just 3 days before 9/11. Of course, 9/11 rocked and changed the world very visibly, but perhaps you could argue that the Durban Conference itself in 2001, the so-called anti-racist conference, has done even more damage, perhaps, to anti-Semitism to the Jewish communities all over the world. I think of Dennis Goldberg. I think of Ronnie Casserils, who's still with us, who compared Israel to Nazis and called Israel baby killers, etc. I only say that just to say just the sort of people we're dealing with here. How safe is it realistically when the ANC really is institutionally very similar to our Labour Party here in the UK?
So look, I mean, that Durban conference is, it's a black mark for everyone. It was a complicated time. For another discussion, I can explain the complexity of the ANC's view. There's a brilliant book called The Unholy Alliance. There were two factors which happened from 70s to the 90s. The apartheid government and the Israeli government are bedfellows, create the nuclear weapon together. The tanks, the R5s, the Galils, there was massive armaments. The Mirage, which became the Cheetah, was the Kafir. So while they were working very closely together, the ANC and the PLO were sharing offices in Lusaka. We had our TRC, which was in the 90s, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and that was during Oslo, so it never really came up. Israel never came to the TRC. And then when the second Intifada explodes, thanks to Arafat walking away, it just exploded an unbelievable hurt and unhappiness, which had been living very much in the ANC. They'd never really forgiven the Israeli government for how close they were to the apartheid government, although they'd forgiven the apartheid government. So that was on the one hand, and then on the other hand, they were bedfellows with the PLO in their dark times. And Mandela, was an unbelievably loyal man. And, when he went to meet Gaddafi, he gave him $1.3 million in a suitcase of cash. And that was when the ANC needed it, when he got released. So it's a very complicated discussion. I'm very happy to have a more in-depth discussion. They really see it very differently to us. And it's one of the things I continuously fight the government on. Some get it better than others. Some are proper anti-Semites. There's a certain Muslim element in the ANC, which is unbelievably pure anti-Semitic. There's a lot of black South Africans in the ANC that have an affiliation towards the Palestinian cause, but feel for South African Jewry and understands Israel's vulnerability. Look, Ronnie Casserils, I mean, he told me himself his obsession is the destruction of the state of Israel. He believes that, because of the Holocaust, it was what the Europeans forced on the Middle East. That's his view. He's been a poster boy. Dennis Goldberg wasn't so. Dennis Goldberg also hated Israel. Don't get me wrong, but his relationship with South African Jewry, he could divorce the two. And I think, a lot of times we fight fiercely. If you Google me, I mainly just fight government. I'm actually very close to the ANC. But our last big fight was Lindiwe Sisulu, which is the Sisulu family, which is one of the proper royalty of the ANC. They tried to downgrade the Israeli embassy in South Africa, which was going to be a massive blow. We were fought to tooth and nail. I must say the Americans have been unbelievable. It's been quite difficult because you have to also manage Israel and the Israeli government, which have also got a little bit, as we say, khatful. They're getting a bit irritated with the South African government and the ANC. But we work pretty well with it. The fascinating thing is we can be proud Jews, proud Zionists, and we don't fear. Okay, not this year, but normally Yom Ha'atzmaut is one of our massive functions, and we're not scared of the protests. So, I mean, we have had a few running battles in our times, and I've been called Zev Krengle baby killers as well. But there's become a bit of a mutual respect. BDS in South Africa, although that Durban conference was very much the birth of it, has really not got the traction it wanted. And yes, in a certain Muslim community, and when there's a war, and when Israel's defending itself against the terrorists in Gaza, and there's dead babies on the screen, it whips up a lot of emotion for the average black South African. but the average black South African is a Christian. He doesn't have those same beliefs. And the average black South African really, he just wants a job and a future. So it's definitely become less of an issue. We also got very much caught in internal politics in the ANC, which Israel was used as a bit of a football ball to be played. So once again, there's complications, but where we've been unbelievably lucky is all our presidents have really understood the complexity, and even President Zuma, who was unbelievably corrupt, his commitment to South African jury and his commitment to understanding the complexity of the Israeli thing was there. So we've always had, I mean, the number two in the ANC, you've got a family called the Dangle family, Jessie Duarte, anyone understands. We've also had very unpleasant scenarios with her. But look, now it's really put on the back benches. I mean, no one even talks about it. But it's a policy that we continuously fight, and we live in a constitutional democracy. We're really not scared to fight our government, and we're happy to tell them what we think when they're out of line. I think the two great things, we've got a great American ambassador, ex-Jewish South African. She's been unbelievable. And then the Israeli ambassador has also been unbelievable, understanding the complexity and the sensitivities in South Africa. We're never going to be Australia, or we're never going to be Canada, or for that matter, America. But South Africa, there's a bigger past on both sides. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, you know, they don't understand the conflict. They got hurt very badly by the Israeli government in the 70s, 80s, which has still affected them.
Hinda, as a young South African, and I don't want to suggest for a moment that Zev is not young, because he looks certainly younger than me. What is your sense of the attitudes or the fears of younger people in South Africa in relation to government policies? You need to just unmute yourself, which I'll do for you. Okay. You need to unmute yourself. Okay. Right.
I think that, you know, South Africa has a lot of opportunity for young people, but there's also fears within the young community in terms of BEE, which so many years later is still a problem in terms of, you know, there has to be a certain amount of black people in certain industries and jobs and everything, and therefore students aren't getting into the studies that they want, or aren't necessarily getting the jobs that they want to get because of this. Having said that, we also are a very blessed community where there are, you know, so many Jewish-run businesses, and everybody knows somebody who knows somebody, that you can always, you know, get a job somewhere. But having said that, that is a real fear. And also, you know, I went on the Nachum Goldman conference about 2 years ago, the South African one, and one of the issues that came up amongst all these South African young people that were there was a fear of that there's a real attitude of, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but for example, anti-white sentiments, you know, at the university. And Zev, you can maybe talk more about this. I know you're very involved in Borges and the general, you know, what's going on at Wits, etc. But people, you know, are feel that a lot of fear. I know that I did a case where an attorney acted completely corruptly, and so I threatened that I was going to go to court and ask for cost de bonus proprius, which means against the attorney themselves for acting corruptly. And he turned around and said he's reporting me to the Black Attorneys Association because I'm racist. Now, any attorney who had acted that way, I would have said the exact same thing to. So, you know, there is a lot of that being thrown in people's faces and fear around that. But having said that, there really is, you know, our work in my practice, I am the only white person in my practice, and there's unbelievable talent, and BEE is a very important thing, because at the end of the day, we were privileged during the apartheid days, and there does need to be some sort of an equalization, but young people are very fearful of this still going on however many years later.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to ask a question or make a comment or raise a topic? Please feel free to do so. You just need to either unmute yourself or press the space bar and hold it down. And while it's held down, you'll be unmuted until you take your finger off. I know that what generally speaking happens is there are lots of questions, but the first person is always shy to ask them. Your screen will light up. You just need to go for it.
I think while we waited, just with it was interesting. The conflict between white and black really came up over about 3-4 years ago, where Zuma's real puppets were, it was an Indian family called the Guptas. The phrase became Zupta, Zuma and Gupta, and they created a lot of unbelievable white, a lot of racism. I mean, the ironies that came from Bell Pottinger, which was a British firm in London, purely white, creating the racism so that they could steal more and be more corrupt. I really do believe under President Ramaphosa, I'm happy to hear Hinda's view, that he's worked very hard to calm those things down. I mean, even, look, we've got a far left party called the EFF, Julius Malema. He gets a lot of publicity. He's promised the world to poor black South Africans, and he still only gets 9-10% of the vote. And even with him, when it comes to the Jewish community, his party is unbelievably anti-Israel, but he's a Lemba, which they regard themselves as one of the lost tribes. And you can still have a conversation, you can still have a dialogue. So there's a lot of rhetoric in South Africa, but I really do believe on that black-white thing, since President Ramaphosa has taken, and there's no corruption, and you don't have a very wealthy family trying to steal billions and creating, they created this Black Land First, they created all organizations which have really started unraveling. So we're far from out the woods, but we really try to create a non-racist, non-sexist society, and I think so far we're doing okay. We haven't succeeded in the economy. People haven't all enjoyed the benefits of freedom of an economy.
And presumably, as here in England, the huge amounts of money which are being thrown in by central government to try and support people during this very awful time is going to lead what was already a struggling economy in a much, much worse position. And it's going to take a long time for South Africa to be able to come out of it, which then must generate more social unrest of one form or another. So looking to the future, are you pessimistic, optimistic, cautiously optimistic? Where do you put yourself on the spectrum?
So, you know, I'm 47 years old. Literally, for 40 years, I've been told there's no future for South African Jews in South Africa. And I've lived an unbelievable life, had unbelievable opportunities, had unbelievable freedom of religion, of expression. I went through the peace call of apartheid. Everyone thought we had no chance in the late 80s, we had no chance in the 90s. We had no chance with Mandela because he was a terrorist. We had no chance when our government of national unity, which was de Klerk with him, left. We had no chance when Mbeki came in. We had no chance when Zuma came in. And we seem to keep going. We're far from out the woods. We know England, yeah, we know America. We're a developing nation. You know, I always tell people you have to compare us to Turkey, Russia, and Brazil. You know, that's where we are. And we're still going to be that. So I do think there's a future. I actually think COVID-19, if government behaves correctly, which we've already seen, you get a lot of money, and at almost 19 Rand to the dollar or 23 Rand to the pound, it goes a long way in South Africa. So, I mean, the IMF gave us $4.2 billion. Our government has to change certain policies. It has to move away from a more left-wing socialist approach where the unions have massive clout. And COVID-19, it could bring South Africa closer. But I mean, President Ramaphosa got $250 million from President Trump. I mean, he called us the S-hole of the world. So I mean, not too many other governments.
And that's when he was being polite.
I was being polite. I was trying. But I'm saying that's that's where we are. People want to see South Africa succeed, and they don't want it to be corrupt. And I think President Ramaphosa is unbelievable. I think he's one of the great presidents. He's been involved with Jewish business his whole life. He's been involved with all different business. He's done very well himself. But he just gets it. He just beats this Zuma Gupta corruption. So it was he wins by 187 votes. So he's got a party. Although we've got 58%, the ANC controls inside that party. You've still got very corrupt people that their options is get back into power or go to jail. So look, President Zuma was meant to have his day in court this week. It's been postponed a month because of COVID-19. This is a case he's been fighting for almost 15 years not to go to court. It's going to be very hard for him to beat. But we've got a direct president who's literally 2 years out of office could land up in jail for corruption, in the next 18 months, 2 years. So there's exciting parts. I think for South Africa, that's always given me comfort is we've had independent courts, and I'm sure Hinda can speak more about that, but they were unbelievable during our corruption times. Our constitutional court was great. We've had unbelievable freedom of expression. And then we've had a civil society that fought back, and we will keep battling through the forest. But
thank you, Zev. You've given us, you've been an outstanding ambassador for South Africa. Hinda, do you get a sense that a large number of South Africans, young South Africans, still want to leave South Africa? It's a question that one of our participants has asked.
As a Chabadnik, I have to throw in that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave South Africa blessing, that it will be good in South Africa until Mashiach comes, and even better thereafter. And I think, as Zev said, we've lived through so much in South Africa, and it's always come out good, and we've survived everything. And and I think there really is a feeling of that in South Africa. South Africans are proud South Africans. And I think that in terms of young people, as Zev said, the Yeshiva College has lost a lot of people in the last year or so to Aliyah, and whether that's the loss or not, they're going home, they're going to Israel. But a lot of people have gone to Israel in the last few years, and that's really where most people, if they are leaving, are going to these days. And there's actually a lot of people coming home to South Africa. For some reason, there are reports that there are people moving back to South Africa. Generally, if I look at, the young professionals and where people are holding, there is a lot of fear. People are scared about their children's future. People are scared about the land, reform if it comes into being. But having said that, the life that South Africans lead is the Jewish community is huge. There's about 20 kosher restaurants. There's so much support within the Jewish community. I mean, as I said, we're one of the only communities in the world that has a minyan still running right now. And really, and people feel that, and there's so many schools and choices and opportunities. So, it's a very hard balance, because people are, on the one hand, scared about what's going to be with our future and our children's future, but on the other hand, people are living a wonderful life here.
So, Zev and Hinda, thank you. You've given us a really, really fascinating insight into a very complex society, and you've spoken with great passion and great knowledge as well. It's been an absolute treat for the 50-odd people who've joined us this evening from the South Hampstead community. It's really So nice of you, so good of you to come onto our program as our foreign correspondents. And I hope that everybody who's participated in our program this evening has found it as fascinating and as interesting as I have. So thank you very, very much. And with that, folks, we are going to end the evening. And please God, you should be well, and the community should be well, and you should indeed be able to flourish in the community ad viat Mashiach, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave in his promise. All the very best to you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Good night to everyone else.
Bye.
Thanks.